And so what we found in a business context, community is really important because it basically de-risks every other part of the business. And to zoom out even more, what I would say is that the reason why that's the case is that the way people buy things has shifted over the past, decade or more. And of course, the Orbit user base, for context, 99% of our customers are software companies. So B2B, B2C, SaaS for the most part. But I think this actually holds true across basically any category of purchase. So there was a time when if you wanted to buy something, you had to talk to a salesperson. You would, go to the showroom floor and they would show you the sofas or like a vacuum cleaner salesperson, the car, like somebody would come to your house and this sort of authority figure would walk you through the options. And like we're rewatching Mad Men right now, and there's a scene where like the vacuum cleaner guy comes by. No, he's actually an air conditioner salesman. It's all the same. It's like this authority figure who's, your only option is to go through this single source of truth. They have all the information. They have all the power. Because of the internet, because of so many other trends and themes, now when we are considering purchasing something, what do? Well, the last thing we want to do is talk to a salesperson almost always. And this is true whether you're buying, a grill for the backyard or an important piece of B2B software. We go and we read reviews. We may go to Reddit and see what they say about it. I mean, I bought a backpack recently for travel. I'm like, I didn't want to talk to a salesperson about that. I wanted to read what everybody else is saying.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast, where we talk about answering the call to leadership, what that means for all of us, how it can help us make better decisions, live fuller lives, and simply be happier people as we go on our journeys through work and life. I have an amazing guest with me today. He's coming to us from San Francisco, California. His name is Patrick Woods. Patrick, are you ready for kickoff?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Mary Lou. I'm excited to be here. Helmets on, strapped in, ready to go.
That's awesome. So, team, here's what I know about Patrick. He is the co-founder and CEO of Orbit, the leading community growth platform. Orbit enables teams to grow and measure their community across any platform. By gathering details of all community interactions in one place, Orbit delivers insight into the individuals and organizations and their relationship with your company. In the past, Patrick has led customer success teams at Keen.io and Figure 8. He's been doing this marketing thing and customer success experience for more than 10 years, and he is the co-creator of the Orbit model. And one thing about Patrick that probably a lot of people who obviously don't know him, and I certainly didn't until right now, he's an avid fencer. And I'm going to be curious to see how fencing plays into your whole approach to leadership in life. But in the meantime, Patrick, welcome to the Play Your Position podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. My first question has to do with when you got the call to leadership. And it's different for everybody, I'm discovering. How old were you? Do you remember having a specific experience when that proverbial light bulb went on and you realized, wow, I'm a leader? Or was it something that happened more gradually? And maybe you were out with some friends or doing some kind of personal reflection and you realized, oh my gosh, I'm really in this leadership role. Tell us your story and give us the context.
Yeah, I think this feels like a therapy session a little bit. Take me back to the beginning. I'm going to lay down on the couch here and tell you a little bit. I'm the oldest of two brothers, I think. I don't know. So like there, from very early childhood, I feel like there was maybe some expectations from my family about, be a great example. Show your brother how to do things, what have you. Yeah, I would probably point to that time frame. Sort of like high school, I was in the band. So I'm a percussionist. So I play percussion. I picked up the piano over the past few years as well. I became the section leader of our drum line. That was always fun to get to interact with the fellow percussionists, but also the band director. And I don't know, people, old soul is a way people would describe me. I don't know. It's kind of a funny thing to say, I guess. So I don't know. I feel like, organically through music, in college, helping lead class projects, it's always kind of been there. I guess for me, whether I wanted it or not, I would say sort of later in my career, I spent many years in the world of advertising, and working inside an ad agency is thrilling. I was not a creative person, so an ad agency has a whole creative department with art directors, copywriters, TV people, etc. I was sort of I started out as sort of like the digital marketing part of the world, and then about a year and a half or so into working at the agency, I realized that startups as a concept were becoming increasingly interesting. So this is back in Memphis, Tennessee, where my hometown. And, I'd spent some time in Texas for grad school, spent some time around Austin, and kind of seen what early stage companies were all about and how they could really create a lot of opportunity for individuals and companies, but the cities they were in. And I was kind of looking around and realized, hey, there's lots of really cool startups happening in Memphis, believe it or not.
Interesting.
And then also at the agency, there's all these really smart and creative people, but if you know anything about the advertising business model, it's kind of premised on like having a handful of key accounts, big logos, the kind of clients that look great on your website, FedEx, Pfizer, folks like that, but for whom the work is not terribly interesting. And, doing billboards for FedEx and things like that, pays the bills, but it doesn't keep the most creative people that engaged. And so at the same time, if you know anything about early stage startups, they're not so great at branding and naming and storytelling. And so I said, gee, what if we could pull these two groups together and on the one hand, connect really great brand experts with really exciting companies and see what type of magic happens. So I pitched internally this concept of essentially doing services for equity for early stage companies and combining those two sort of fun and interesting forces. And, that was sort of I would say an early point of departure for me on the leadership journey. It was, the agency I was at the time, the CEO kind of believed in this idea, believed in this vision, gave me the resources to do it. And, professionally, that was really a kind of a turning point to get to see that, have that vision, see it through, and then, recruit the team internally basically to bring it to life. Because, in the ad agency business model, me as kind of like the biz dev account strategy person, none of the creative people worked for me directly. They were in a separate organization. They worked for the head of creative. And so you learn a lot about, influence versus authority and how to get things done in a way that gets things, moves the work forward and delivers results in a context where, I couldn't fire anybody. And not that I would do that, but there's no sort of no stick, quote unquote, proverbially in that context. And so I think I learned a lot in that world about, not so much building consensus so much as trying to be inspiring and storytelling and hoping to inspire people to work on my projects when they've got, the head of account saying, hey, we've got this deadline for Pfizer. We've got to get this done. And I'm over here with all these free little startups that aren't paying us in terms of cash. And so, I think that was pretty addictive. Around that same time, I kind of identified a few different opportunities for community building broadly in the ecosystem in Memphis. Kind of realized that there were lots of interesting people moving to the city. There were, lots of startups happening, really cool projects happening in art and the nonprofit space. And there wasn't kind of a central landing point for people to connect with each other. And so I kind of spun up this monthly meetup group. It's kind of a blend of networking / dating / people just drinking, just sort of this
people
like
just
fun,
drinking.
Yeah, I mean, that's, for 20 somethings, that's kind of the name of the game. Yeah. And we basically, the theory is, me and I had a couple friends that helped me start it, was that if we could create a space that had a very low barrier to entry, that interesting things would happen. And we weren't sure what those things would be and on what time horizon. But we ran this program for, I think, about 4 years. It was called Undercurrent. Our first event had 60 or so people at it. And by the end, we were, averaging 200 or 300 or 400 people per month at our events. And, from that, people started companies, people got married. The joke that I had was that, I know that was like when somebody names their kid after me or like Undercurrent, like that's how I know we've won. But I don't think that ever happened, unfortunately. But, so that I think that was around that time of my life, like getting a taste for leadership and formally getting the sort of entrepreneurial bug, if you will, starting things from scratch and seeing what would happen. And I think the lessons from those times sort of stick with me today, both in terms of leadership, but also seeing how community as a concept can be so generative and lead to self-actualization and connections and ideas and so much sort of unpredictable, chaotic, interesting energy that's become quite addictive and really has defined a lot about where I am today with Orbit. I don't know. Those are some of the things that stand out to me as I think about my leadership journey, at least in the earlier stages, that really set a course for where I am today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing such rich details about your experiences. It helps. What I take away from what you just described is you did a lot of experimentation. You weren't afraid to try things. You looked around and you didn't hold high expectations for what something would do for you. Rather, you said, let's just see where this goes. And then iterated along the way, which in all fairness is what life is in a lot of ways. I think it's interesting the way there's this kind of this feeling or I don't know if it's a feeling so much as a thought process of at some point we arrive and we're done and people want to just settle into something. Well, that's not how nature works. Everything is constantly changing around us. And certainly in the business climate today, you've had the privilege of riding those early days of when everybody was like, start up this, start up that, and got to see what worked, what didn't. So when you look at the through line between those early days in Memphis and where you are now with Orbit in San Francisco, Patrick, what would you say is the thing that I guess kept you going and not, if something didn't work out perhaps the way you'd hoped or wanted and you ended up somewhere else, what would that be, that through line?
There it seems like there's several ways people think about the future. I think about my wife in this context. She's the type of person that can be very specific about, a 3 or 5 year plan. Here's where I want to be, here's what I want to accomplish, and kind of set her sights on that. And I think that's great. My path or my approach has always been a little bit different. And I'm not sure if it's because maybe I don't have a strong vision or maybe I'm afraid to pick something specific, but my approach to goal setting has always been more directional than specific and sort of pointing the vessel in the right direction and placing smart bets along the way to get there. So when I think about what that means is that when I was at the agency in Memphis, I sort of was getting this entrepreneurial bug. I was interested in startups, and I didn't know what that was going to look like. So, I guess one path could have been, I'm just going to move to San Francisco and crash on somebody's floor and just figure it out when I get there. That's not who I am. But I said, here are the resources I have now. Here's what I can do now to start pointing my ship in the direction I want to go in. So that looked like creating the business unit to do services for equity. I started Undercurrent, started doing all these things through the business unit at the agency. I worked with, a dozen or more startups across Memphis, the Southeast, and San Francisco. So through that, I started coming to San Francisco, going to places like Austin and Boulder, and just for business development purposes and meeting people and building the network. And then ultimately we started building out a client base in San Francisco. And so that's sort of like an interesting inflection point in my life because it exposed me to a whole new world. The language, the people, the norms, the expectations, how businesses get built. It's drinking from the fire hose. And one of the companies that you mentioned in the intro is a company called Keen.io. Keen was one of our clients at the agency. And so we got to know them really well. I got to know the founders, the CEO. We did some projects together. And then I think it was between their Series A and Series B, they said, hey, we've got this company. It's working. We've got all these customers and we don't have anybody looking after them. So they sign up, they start paying us, and then they're kind of on their own. And the CEO, Kyle, who's now a dear friend of mine, said, look, you seem to be pretty good at managing clients. Would you be interested in coming and doing this for us?
Oh.
And that was how I sort of made the jump into this world of startups more directly. So yeah, I moved from Memphis to San Francisco, packed up, sold everything, brought 2 suitcases, and flew.
Wow.
Flew yeah. Very classic, go west story there.
Yes.
And yeah, so I dove in head first, learned a lot about the market we were in. So we were selling it was a very technical product. It was an analytics product. It was API driven. So we were selling to software developers. Keen had 40 or 50,000 developers in our user community. So this was also where I sort of got the first taste for community in the context of a business. So I had felt it back in Memphis through Undercurrent, through our other events, like, gee, this is a cool thing that happens. Keen was where I was first exposed to it when the community is rallied around a product and a technology. And so I was director of customer success. So I got to spend a lot of time with our customers and other folks in the company and with the community. And, from there, I think if I had sort of arrived at the waypoint on the journey, called San Francisco or called working for a startup, kind of the next one was like, okay, I think I want to be a founder. Like I've got this energy. I like starting things. There's an assessment called StrengthsFinder. It's published by Gallup. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. A lot of assessments are kind of like, find your weakness, work on those. StrengthsFinder says, well, you've got a few things you're really good at. Just go be really good at those. And
right.
Yeah, right. For me, my number one strength, I've taken it recently. I took it years ago at Keen. Has pretty much always been activator.
Okay.
And the activator strength is people who like the creation process. They're willing to take a leap of faith and pull things together and try stuff and put themselves out there and really get stuff going. And that's I've seen that as a through line through my career of like starting the new business unit at the agency, starting Undercurrent, starting all these other side projects, starting a new team at Keen. And I kind of realized that, okay, I don't know what it's going to be. Like, I don't have a vision for a product. I didn't wake up with an aha moment or have some shower insight, but my theory, kind of going back to my approach to pointing the ship and placing bets, was that if I spend enough time immersed in the culture of San Francisco and Silicon Valley and learning and listening and connecting, that something's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just was willing to put myself out there and have the conversations and push myself to learn and be curious. So at Keen, I met the VP of engineering is a guy named Josh, who fast forward to today is now my co-founder at Orbit.
Okay.
And yeah, so Josh is incredibly technical. He built so much of the Keen platform. So Keen wound down about a year and a half or 2 years after I was there. Had sort of a small exit to a private equity firm. It was tough at the end, kind of a classic startup raises a lot of money, not enough to achieve exit velocity. So we ended up selling the company. So after Keen, Josh went to another company. He built the first developer relations team there at a company called Algolia. In the context of developer-centric startups, there's a whole field called developer relations. And it's kind of like a blend of marketing and product and engineering and PR, but it's specific to an audience of software developers. So we'll come back to that theme probably a bit in our conversation. And I went to another company, was the director of customer success there. Wasn't really happy because I'd kind of done the customer success thing. I felt like I learned most of what was learnable, and was kind of getting that entrepreneurial itch. So I was about 9 months into that role. The company did like a 30% layoff. So like cut all the directors basically, just very classic, like extend the runway, get this thing packaged up for sale. And when my manager was like, hey, we're doing this huge cut, and unfortunately you're part of it, I was actually glad.
Yeah, you were like, yes.
Yeah, San Francisco, the West Coast is such an interesting place. It's one of the few places in the world where like you get laid off and people say congratulations.
Yes. No, you're right.
Yeah, because there's so much energy and opportunity. And so yeah, Josh was kind of between things as well. So we started, I guess, in sometime in middle to late 2018. We kind of got our little band back together and started a consulting business, kind of in the community building, developer relations space. So, by now, my background is somewhat commercial, customer success, community building, but also like marketing, branding, advertising. And Josh is
nice blend.
very, very technical. So like our skills are super complementary. And so that really kind of brings us up to kind of like the modern story of Orbit, because consulting is just a fantastic excuse to have tons of conversations with really smart people, and kind of again coming back to that theme of being open, placing bets through those conversations. I think Josh and I both kind of landed on the opportunity and the sort of like the business case for what Orbit would become. And even though I knew years before that doing a startup, being a founder was something that I aspired to do, I didn't know when that would happen or how that would look. But I tried to always remain open to the possibilities and really just stay curious.
Yes.
And, through each of those steps, being open, staying curious, pointing the ship, really, I don't know, so much of this stuff for me can feel like survivorship bias, but for me, it's always been my orientation is to be open and be thoughtful. But I've never, sat down and made a 10-year plan, but rather, kind of looked over the horizon and said, look, the world is chaotic, things will change. But if we know this is the direction we want to go, here's the things we would do to get there, the steps we would take. And so that's kind of been the through line, I would say, over the past many years of my career.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
You put yourself in the path of something time and time again. And in doing that, because you were curious, because you never, it doesn't sound like you ever lost faith in yourself. You just remained aware of what was going on around you and had enough self-awareness to know that customer success role towards the end of that part of your career was just not working for you. And thus could see a layoff in a positive light versus being devastated the way some people are, because their mind is just wired differently, or they developed expectations about how something was going to be, and life is always going to be throwing us different curveballs. And the other piece that I think is really worthy of just emphasizing is you were always out meeting people and forming relationships. Thus, why Orbit, this business that you have now, I'd like you to talk about the role of community in business today. We see this word tossed around all the time on social media. And I think for a lot of people, there's either they think, well, I'm in a community. They start thinking about the different groups they belong to, or maybe they go to meetups, or they're in a BNI or something. And I think what you're getting at is different to a degree. I'd like you to talk about why community is a business's best growth strategy, and also how community is the new pre-sales for companies.
Yeah, so I'll start with a little bit of definition here, because to your point, community can mean so many things. It can mean, my local fencing club. It could mean a large open source project. So what are we talking about here? So we have this sort of 3-part framework to help describe the type of community, and that can often be helpful to frame up the conversation. So I like to think of 3 types of communities. You have communities of product, practice, and play. So community of play is people coming together to have fun. So it might be the people that play basketball with you every Tuesday. It might be your running club. It might be, folks that do fantasy football together. But It's people coming together to do a thing and have a good time. So that's a very common type of community. A community of practice is a group of people coming together to work on a skill or a discipline or a profession. So this is kind of getting to some of the things you were talking about, like a mastermind group or a meetup for CEOs or a Slack community that's all about CTOs getting together to talk about technology. And so the goal of those types of communities is leveling up on a skill or a discipline or a practice. And then the third type is communities of product. And these are folks coming together to talk about a tool or a framework or technology to get better at using it. Some classic examples of this are things like, support forums, like I'm here to get help. But more and more we see these product-based communities involving conversations between users of a tool. So this is a little bit meta, but in the Orbit user community, our customers and community members talk about like, hey, how are you using Orbit? What reports are you running? How are you using this data to get more resources? How are you using the API? Like, how can we get better collectively at using this tool or framework? The Salesforce Trailblazer community is probably the best version of this in the world. And so we think about all three here at Orbit, but the most common in a business context, of course, is the community of product with some degree of a community of practice going on as well. So that's what we mean when we talk about community. And so what we found in a business context, community is really important because it basically de-risks every other part of the business. And to zoom out even more, what I would say is that the reason why that's the case is that the way people buy things has shifted over the past, decade or more. And of course, the Orbit user base, for context, 99% of our customers are software companies. So B2B, B2C, SaaS for the most part. But I think this actually holds true across basically any category of purchase. So there was a time when if you wanted to buy something, you had to talk to a salesperson. You would, go to the showroom floor and they would show you the sofas or like a vacuum cleaner salesperson, the car, like somebody would come to your house and this sort of authority figure would walk you through the options and like your only option was to purchase.
Salesman.
Yes, exactly. We're rewatching Mad Men right now, and there's a scene where like the vacuum cleaner guy comes by. No, he's actually an air conditioner salesman. It's all the same. It's like this authority figure who's, your only option is to go through this single source of truth. They have all the information. They have all the power. Because of the internet, because of so many other trends and themes, now when we are considering purchasing something, what do? Well, the last thing we want to do is talk to a salesperson almost always. And this is true whether you're buying, a grill for the backyard or an important piece of B2B software. We go and we read reviews. We may go to Reddit and see what they say about it. I mean, I bought a backpack recently for travel, and like, I didn't want to talk to a salesperson about that. I wanted to read what everybody else is saying. Who has used this thing and can tell me about it? What are the pros and cons, features, benefits? What do the reviews say? Maybe I go to YouTube and see what content people have created about it. What are the unboxing videos? What are the teardowns? This is true for important software. You want to read reviews and understand how people are using this today. And you probably want to try it before you buy it. And that's really, really different than going to a website, filling out a form, waiting for a salesperson to call you. They have all the information. And so what we say is that the way, like, software and basically any good, it's no longer sold, it's actually adopted. And people want to try before they buy and talk to other people about it. Okay, so in that reality, what's the biggest driver of all those things I just described? I think it's a community, because if you have a big community of product/practice, people are in your forum, they're talking about how they use the tool, they're giving you feedback, they're probably creating blog posts about how they use your tool, they're doing videos, they're giving talks about it, they're on Twitter discussing it, and basically everything that used to be the pre-sales process, so talking to a salesperson, talking to an account exec, whatever, it's all done through the community now. And so now if I'm considering buying a software, I'm going to go look at those conference talks. I'm going to join the forum or join the Discord server and see what the conversations are like. Who else is using this tool? Are they like me or are they different than me? Are the or like, is the company responsive when there are problems surfaced by the community? Like, what does that look like? If I'm going to invest in the software, like, how do I know there's going to be support? And it, if I see 1,000 people talking about it, that's a lot more compelling to me as a user and a buyer than if no one's talking about it. And so there's all this social proof tied up in a community that drives so much value for the company. And that comes through in terms of brand awareness. It comes through in adoption. So like, let's say I buy the software and now I'm trying to get it set up and implemented. Maybe I go to the community and say, like, how do you all do it? Like, what's the easiest way to connect to the data? And so it helps with adoption. An active community helps with retention, because if there's a group of my peers that I can talk to about this, I'm less likely to go to a competing software product because I've got the emotional buy-in and the support system of the community. So yeah, the community basically de-risks and accelerates every part of the business. And so in kind of the early days of community and software world, you would often see the community as sort of pigeonholed into the support forum. But I think smart companies, and a lot of our customers are included in that, are starting to realize that the community can drive tons and tons of value. And so that's
also
sort of
destroy
role.
you. You can go the other way, because I'm thinking about when you talked about your backpack, I'm thinking about on YouTube, the volume of people who are out. There's people in my life who love extreme camping and going out and testing out all these different products of everything from, what's the R value for your blow up pad to the best bushcraft knife to this tent at Walmart really outplayed or outperformed the high end one. It's remarkable to me, the volume of what you're getting at is these community members, whether they realize. I'm wondering, and I know I'm not talking about software, but in your world, Patrick, with the software, have you seen a community destroy a company? You don't have to name a name, but I'm just curious, can just the sheer volume of people trashing something take down a company?
Yeah, I think especially in B2B software world, there's an interesting facet of how to frame this up. I would say that it's easy to trash a brand, on Twitter. If it's maybe a consumer brand, my work isn't tied up in this thing, like I'm annoyed at McDonald's today. Okay, there's not a lot of cost for me saying that. I think what we see is that in the communities that we work with, it's very fairly professional in that, if I'm trashing a business or a company, that sort of negativity will shine a negative light on who I am to the rest of the community as well. So there's a little bit of accountability in the world of, I would say, B2B software. So it's less of like a vocal, dragging like you might see on Twitter for a consumer brand, and more of to use like quiet quitting is kind of the metaphor, where the community sort of just dissolves over time, and what used to be a very active town square now feels fairly vacant. And that's sort of the signal that's actually, I think, much stronger than like a virulent backlash about something. The sort of absence of conversation can be a real, warning for people. Yeah, great. That's for people considering adopting that. So that's the way we see it play out is people just sort of fade away. And that's very damaging.
Okay. So how does Orbit specifically help companies, and who is your ideal client?
Yeah, so our customers' community is important for them, and that community happens online across multiple platforms. So our customers, when they arrive to us, they're typically managing conversations that are happening on a combination of Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit, their internal forum, hosted on something like Discourse, a tool called Incited. There's a chat platform called Discord. There's community conversations happening on Slack, on a developer tool called GitHub. And so basically the challenge that our customers face is, hey, community is a big part of the value we create and we capture, but it's occurring on 10 or more platforms online. And so it means it's very hard to keep track of those conversations. It's very hard to be responsive and reactive. It's very hard to be proactive because our team is just like putting out fires or trying to be responsive across 12 different tools. You can imagine how time consuming that is.
Yes.
And then because the data is siloed across, let's say, 10 different channels, we as a company don't understand the community journey across all of those touch points. And so it's hard to make investments in terms of ROI and understanding where the opportunity is. And so with Orbit, basically what our customers do is they use our integrations, they connect all those services. And so what you get at the end of the day is at the individual level, you can see that, hey, like a month ago, Patrick followed you on Twitter. And then he retweeted one of your tweets. And then he came to your forum and asked a question about how to get started. And then the next day created a trial account for your software. And they came back to the forum and asked 10 more questions. And then a week later became a paying customer and then tweeted about how happy they are. You can actually see that breakdown in their journey at the individual level across all platforms. This helps you make better decisions about like elevating your champions. It help you make better decisions about who your sales team should reach out to. And so sort of you can think about Orbit as the single source of truth for customer and community engagement across all your channels. So you get lots of data, you get some reporting, some automation, you can send messages through the platform. But yeah, it's kind of like understanding people and then delivering the right experience to them based on where they are in that journey.
Oh my goodness. So fascinating. It is so not my world at all. And yet I think about how the application of what you just described can really it has universal possibilities for any kind of business. It's interesting that you came full circle back to people. That at the end of the day, it's the person's experience. It's the individual's journey with the product or service, whatever it may be. And all these tools are now available to us. The platforms, as you mentioned, numerous platforms, which I've had several conversations in the last 2 months with different people here on this show about how many leaders are almost paralyzed, if not already paralyzed, by how many platforms are out there and not knowing where to go. And you just got to that. How do you manage all these conversations going on? It's a sign of our times. It is a reality. And it sounds like one of the benefits of working with you and your Orbit team is helping people corral some of that data so they can make better decisions.
Yeah, that's right. And it is for us so much about the individual humans on the other side of the screen or the app or what have you. Or when we think about it, it's interesting that there's so many words for people in business. Like, so you might call them leads, you might call them prospects, you might call them community members, you might call them opportunities. It's just funny that we have all this jargon, but it's actually just humans on the other side, kind of regardless of their commercial relationship with the company. And when we think about what we're trying to do as a business and as a brand is trying to bring more of the individual human into the story and help companies make better decisions about all of the humans that are in their orbit, not just the ones that could turn into $1 million contract tomorrow. Because, we think that value is created over time. And in the world of community, that value can take months or years to come to fruition. But so many times businesses are thinking about hitting the number for the week or the month. And so they actually end up sacrificing those relationships in the near term and give up the long-term upside. So if we can help companies think more long-term and think about the individuals, we think that is better for the business, but we also think the experience as a customer, as a prospect, as a community member will be better as a result of that more human-centric thinking. So, lot for us to solve for, but that's what keeps us going.
Yeah, that human on the other side of the app or the screen is a living, breathing human with all the issues that humans face, and depending on how old somebody is or what their life circumstances are, all plays into it. And it's good to remember that it isn't a faceless group of people with a credit card, and also that time is a variable. And in our high-tech world where there's a real paradox between wanting things instantly and then being patient. You are in the part of the world, Patrick, where a lot of these platforms and tools originated. And I'm curious, I know you haven't lived there your whole life, but from your vantage point today, in what ways are you seeing technology coming of age and coming out of the infancy, that, the startup of tech, and entering more of that adolescent and then young adulthood?
I think it's partially related to the prevalence, I would say, of what was once considered very high tech. Just taking the iPhone, for example, it's almost like anyone of any socioeconomic class has access to an iPhone today. Not anyone, of course, but if you look at the Apple sales numbers, it looks like most of the Western world. What's interesting about that is the computing power that everyone has access to makes everything feel normal. We're sort of used to it. And the expectations and the relationship with technology change a lot, I think, from, even, just 10 years ago, like social and local and mobile, like these concepts were all very new and exciting. And what does it mean when we can all be connected? And, when we know where everyone is and we can like do one-to-one communication or whatever. It turns out there's lots of risks associated with those things. So I think there's, I think we're maturing as a society to understand the types of guardrails that are needed for technology. And I think the good news is that a lot of folks at, social networks and things like that are thinking more and more about that. For so long, there was such an emphasis on, growth at all cost and trying to make software, addictive, and like, how do we use behavioral economics and, cognitive psychology to increase page views in our app, and that was like a thing. Like it growth hacking as a discipline is like, not limited to that exclusively, but, celebrating cracking that type of, code was a thing that people were thrilled about. I think that's changed a lot. I think we as a technologists, I guess, collectively have realized that addiction is a real thing when it comes to social applications of technology. And so I think there's a lot more thoughtful deliberation going on around those things, and understanding that technology, should be a means to an end and not the end in of itself.
Yeah.
So, driving page views in your social app is not the end. But hopefully we can use technology to create benefit. We talk about at Orbit, like the difference between value creation and value capture.
Yes.
And we think that, I think that so many companies were focused exclusively on value capture for so long. But if technology is working well, it's going to create a ton of excess good that we don't have to monetize every single, cent of value that's being created. Yeah. So like, of that consumer surplus that's being created, I think if companies can think comprehensively about value creation and capture, I think that's a useful framework for the role of technologists. And like, what is the value we're creating for society? Of course, we're going to capture some of it. We're a business, but can we also think about the value creation aspect and what that would mean?
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. And again, the broader application is for anybody in business is thinking about it from the standpoint of, I love what I do. I'm bringing good to the world. That there was a time when one of the catchphrases was monetize your message, and it did a lot of damage because people really didn't know what that meant. And then there was a lot of value capture around claiming whatever the message might have been. And it left a lot of, roadkill in its wake. And at the same time, it was a natural, I think, part of this whole evolution that you're speaking of, where now that the dust has cleared, so to speak, and people are starting to look at the broader implications of what has been created, what has been put into place culturally, socially. Unfortunately, there's been some casualties along the way. And if you look at any time in human history where there were big shifts that happened, that was just part of it. You don't want that. It's not what anybody sets out to do, I don't think. And it takes, I think, people like yourself and your co-founder and your team who have perspective to say, it's possible to actually use these things to drive growth without a lot of destruction, and in ways that leave people feeling better versus worse. And I just want to say, team, I hope you go and look at Patrick's website and you look at his branding, particularly, I just love your logo. It's just so beautifully done. It's so simple, and yet it has that expressive sense of being with, and I just, the word itself, Orbit. I'm a word person, and it's like, what a great name for a company, especially with what you do, and being within each other's orbits. It's really cool. So I wanted to say that because I'm impressed when people get it right. You got it right. You got it right.
Thanks.
Yeah. So as we come out of it, this has been such a great conversation, Patrick. Where can people find you online? Where do you hang out?
Yeah. So I am on Twitter at Patrick J. Woods, all one word. So try to tweet about startup stuff, community building, things like that. Our website is orbit.love. That's right.
Nice.
.love is actually a domain name these days. And
wow.
it kind of leans into like a lot of our brand vibes. So it's pretty fun. So yeah, feel free to happy to keep the conversation going on Twitter. Give me a shout out there, and that's where you can find me.
Okay. Any thoughts on the new owner of Twitter? It's too early to tell.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have any hot takes in the can ready for that. I'm just, the Twitter headquarters is just a couple of blocks where I'm sitting right now, so it's pretty.
Oh boy,
pretty
yeah.
surreal.
A lot of
to
changes.
Be, right in the center of all that. So yeah, it'll be exciting no matter what happens. I can say that with confidence.
I love that. And Team PYP loves to get their hands on books. Maybe it's old favorites or new ones. What are a couple of books, Patrick, that have been instrumental guides on your leadership journey?
Yeah, there's many. If I had to pick a few, I'll pick a couple of genres, I guess, to give you some quick ones. So there's a book called The $1 Trillion Coach. It's about Bill Campbell, who is like a very famous Silicon Valley leadership coach. Tons and tons of practical application throughout that book. Another to go to the more abstract is Helmer's 7 Powers. It's one of the best strategy books I've ever read. Tons of frameworks, well, 7 specifically, about different ways to think about strategy. A super practical one for leaders, right now is a book called Amp It Up. It's from the CEO of Snowflake, one of the more successful cloud companies. And Frank Slootman's the CEO, and he's done a couple companies, and he's just known for amping up the process and the speed and the pace and doing more faster, which is pretty interesting. And then the final one is an interesting one that I'll leave you all with. It's a book called Polarity Management. And if you go to Amazon and find this book, the cover looks wacky. It's written by a PhD. It's just not like, I think the cover design is what keeps it out of the sort of business book recommendation circuit. But it's gets to this idea that our brain, our teams often want an answer. Like, we want this solution to a problem, but in a complex world, there may not be a simple answer, but there may actually be 2 poles that we're trying to balance against. So, and many organizations, stability and change are like 2 of these poles. And so the risk is that you're on one end of the spectrum or the other and don't recognize it. So what typically happens is, like, in a stable, if you're stable, like, you've got strong alignment, you've got, a polished product, your employees are feeling great, you got customer trust, but at some point you get comfortable, you start losing ground, you fail to adapt, then everybody says, we've got to be more innovative. And so then you go to the other pole, which is change, and you do a lot of innovation, you move fast, a lot of energy. And then over time, as that continues to rotate, you start to lose alignment, you lose trust, your employees are tired and are burned out. And then you say, well, we got to get stability again. and that's just, and I think the point of the book is like that's okay, because you're not going to solve that. Like, stability or change is a false dichotomy. It's actually both. And for me, the framework and the language of the book has been very helpful, especially in a startup, of kind of identifying where we are in a bipolar situation, and even identifying when there's, when 2 teams are like butting heads for like a month. It's like, okay, actually, we're trying to solve something here. This is actually a polarity that needs to be managed, not a problem to be solved. So yeah, the book is called Polarity Management. We wrote a blog post about this. The title of the blog is Move Fast and Fix Things. If you just Google that term, you'll get a good summary of the post. So yeah, that's a fun one I like to recommend because it's not one of the more common ones on the book recommendation list. So hopefully people enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you. I have not heard of any of the books that you mentioned, which is, and I'm a book person, so thank you so much. And team, you know that I'll have links to these books on Patrick's show notes page at pyppodcast.com, along with his Twitter handle and the Orbit website. And I will find that blog post and put a link to that too, because that just sounds really fascinating. I love the law of polarity. It's one of the universal laws, and there's two sides to everything. And the tension between the two is really where the answer, if a air quote answer, lies. And that's one of the hardest things for humans, especially young people, because they haven't lived long enough to understand, to recognize, oh, it's okay. It's okay to be a little chaotic right now, rather than trying to fix it. Or it's okay to be a little bit bored right now. Right? That boredom is actually that's a whole nother topic. But I think one of the greatest gifts my parents gave me and my brother were these long stretches of time where there were times when I remember I'm so bored. And, my mother would say, or my father would say, figure out something, you'll figure it out. And I would invent something, or I would create something, or I would go actually physically do something. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay. It's really, so that book sounds fascinating. Excuse me, fascinating. And Patrick, the work you do is needed. It's refreshing. And I have just absolutely loved our conversation today. Thank you so much for taking time from your world to share your story with me and Team PYP.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Very, very fun conversation. And it's, I have to say, nice to zoom out of the very technical aspects of my job and, talk about the big picture. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.